Oh yes, Martin MD continues. It's awesome that Godzilla minus one is doing so well as a Godzilla fan. Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic. Me too. I'm so thrilled with this. I was, um, I was frankly just quite pleasantly shocked at how what the reaction has been. Very much so. So very pleased. And as I mentioned, when I saw the film here in the local movie theater, it was a fairly packed. It wasn't full capacity, but it was pretty much there. And it was a morning showing on a Sunday, like 10 a.m. showing on a Sunday. So I don't know what the theater itself wasn't that crowded. I mean, the concession stand wasn't. I mean, there were people there, but it wasn't like there were lines or anything like that. So it wasn't like an overly flowing theater presence, the main lobby area. But the theater, the actual place where we sat down and watched Godzilla minus one, it was fairly full. So I too was am very pleased with the responses to that film. I'm very happy to see that, and some of the sequences are just nuts, absolutely great. Oh my goodness, and the force of the impact and the stakes, and I love how the stakes are so personalized. And what's more, what this is so fascinating to me. It's done in the kind of context of of sort of World War II politics dynamics, but it does so in a very clever way. It does it in a way which I think makes for very kind of universal kind of accessibility. Because it's not always the case where you get a film that has, say, at the context of the film, say, a main character set against the backdrop of World War II or immediate post World War II. Also discussing this idea of fighter pilots and this notion, right, and the main character situation in the war. You have the situation in the film, but it's done in a way that has a kind of universal. Uh, how should I put it? There is a way in which one can sympathize with the character's plight, and it's also done in a way that I think is very nuanced too, in terms of a a type of the way it turns that type of situation of the war, which is itself quite cynical and very dark in terms of this idea of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, and death. But the film turns that into this notion of a type of uplifting. It rejects that concept of self-sacrifice and death, and it turns it into this feeling of uplift, even in the face of almost total defeat. There's this way of we must survive, which is a very this it has this way of turning cynicism into optimism very effectively, while being a super entertaining action adventure film. Where Godzilla, and I mentioned this when I love how a film has Godzilla where Godzilla or Gojira as a character, as a being, can be at this very same time both the hero and the villain. There's a moment where Godzilla, and I'll try to be as vague as possible, uh, but Godzilla's in the water and being essentially attacked by by fighter planes or something, or boats or something, and there are explosions happening. And it's amazing because Godzilla is doing something which is immediately threatening the very lives of the characters that we've come to really uh, love and admire and know as we've watched the film. So Godzilla is a threat or menace, but when Godzilla's getting hit and you see the reaction, you see, oh my goodness, you sympathize with Godzilla. So it has that incredible way of combining the threat and menace of Godzilla with the sort of sympathies, which is a really difficult thing to achieve. Not even I thought back on my feelings of other past Godzilla films, and it did it kind of well, I think, in great examples of say the Heisei era. Especially film, I don't know, like Godzilla's Destroyer, for example. I think that's probably the epitome of that for me. But even a film like Shin Godzilla or Shin Gojira, which I love. Gojira is still a kind of quote unquote chaotic villainous presence. There isn't any sense of a type of triumphant, brooding hero aspect of the Gojira in Shin Gojira. And I say it's one of my favorites of the new modern era age of Gojira films, but very villainous. Not so in say the Destroyer era of Heisei or any, but even if you get to a film like it's known in English as it's Godzilla 1985. Godzilla 1985 is pretty much a villain, very much a villain until maybe about the last 5 minutes or maybe no maybe 4 or 5 minutes of the film. Then he becomes like a kind of tragic hero, kind of, but it was never done combined in the same shot. You know, Godzilla, I think in Godzilla 1985, again, I'm relying on the English title. It's really 84, but it's but at 85, it's Godzilla was more or less a villain doing these terrible things, and then the government's response and blundering of the situation, then trying to recover. That's part of the action of the film. But you know, and all this like Super X stuff. But even in the earlier, say the Showa era films, even you know in the 50s, Godzilla was always a villainous, ominous, and horror presence. And I'm speaking of the original film from '4, and but then you get into the sequel, like Raids Again and things, and it becomes a kind of heroic presence almost immediately, but never at the same time. So very rarely, even in the context of Godzilla history, do you have Godzilla being both a hero and a villain at the same time. But it happened here in Godzilla -1, I would say. And I think that is incredible, absolutely incredible. So in the context of my own, say, subjective viewpoints of the history of Godzilla cinema, this stands apart very, very much so. And there are Destroyer vibes to this, which I think are chilling. Oh my goodness! Even down to the little details of things, little details of little debris that you see in the water there. Oh, it's great. But anyway, I love that film, Godzilla -1. That was great. I don't know. Again, I have to think. Is it my favorite Godzilla film? I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to still go with Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. You know, I love Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla from the early '70s. That's gonna be. Yeah, and then Terror of Mechagodzilla. I mean, I know sometimes I know it's somewhat maybe fashionable isn't the right word, but it's sometimes tempting to regard especially the later Showa period of Godzilla films as being campy and buffoonish, and oftentimes I think even in some of the great discussions of Godzilla that I've seen. I haven't seen a lot, but I've seen a bit, say on YouTube, people who have praised Godzilla -1. There have been some discussion points where it's like, oh, Godzilla has been a kind of camp figure from the Showa era, and citing, I don't know, you know, clips from sort of the monsters of, I don't know, like Monsters Attack or something like that, or Son of Godzilla or something. But which I grant you has these, I think, camp qualities to it. But I stand by the fact that I think the tail end of the Showa era, those being Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and then Terror of Mechagodzilla, those have camp vibes for sure, but there are some real resonant emotional beats that are very tragic, especially Terror of Mechagodzilla. That is such a tragic film. And I dare say, too, that some of the emotional resonances that I think are really rippling out and affecting a lot of audiences when people are talking about the characters of Godzilla -1, I would argue that a lot of that emotional resonance could be said to also be existing in some of the key relationships in Terror of Mechagodzilla. It's not quite the same, I understand, but there are some real emotional beats that are very moving in Terror of Mechagodzilla. That make it, I think, a very grand way to bow out in terms of the end of the Showa era. It's not a weak film. It's a very strong film, as well as Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. I think that's, as I say, that's my favorite film. It's a film I've seen the most. It's a film that I can never get tired of. I love the Godzilla poses, and I love the Mechagodzilla as a character. It's just absolutely fascinating in terms of the robotic structure of Mechagodzilla. I love the way that you see how Mechagodzilla flying, and Mechagodzilla's neck suddenly disappears as he flies. I love little bits like that, and just and the sort of the multicolored energy beams and oh, it's great. And then like even the English dub, the bit where Godzilla has the two electricity columns there, and then oh, so great, absolutely great. And the Masaru Sato score, I know Masaru Sato is not the preeminent Godzilla musician, but Sato's score is it has that wonderful dum bum ba bum 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 ba bum, and then the fight between Godzilla and Anguirus, very bloody fight. You're talking, that's, oh my goodness, traumatized me as a kid. But anyway, Godzilla -1. So if you haven't seen the film yet, you're in for a treat. And I do love to. It had some surprises that like there's, again, I'll try to be as vague as possible, but there's a bit in the film that involves a discussion about a little control or lever in a cockpit of a plane, and I thought that it's done kind of briefly, but it's done in a way where if you try to think 2 steps ahead of what you imagine the film might conclude with, you think, oh, maybe they might do something with this lever or control that I'm getting a quick glimpse of and I'm not gonna hear from again, but maybe I might see this again later. And I thought, oh, if something's gonna happen, it might have something to do, and something kind of happens, but it went totally against what I was expecting. And I love little things like that. I really do. I thought that was very these surprises that were just part of the fun and joy of watching Godzilla -1. And what I love too is I think I mean it's well, what was I going to say? Oh, yes. There's another bit, too, where I love how Godzilla's look is given scale. And there's always this way Godzilla has been seen traveling through bodies of water in the Godzilla film. Sometimes it's done really effectively. Sometimes it's kind of a hulking mass trying to walk through a large body of water, much like if one is in a large pool vat and trying to walk through. It's pretty tough. It's a good cardiovascular exercise. But there's a bit where Godzilla is not kind of swimming with his head kind of above water that way, which is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I love sequences like this because it's doing a little twist on the take there. I mean, Godzilla traveling through water, this is an aspect of Godzilla's, say, I don't know, daily exercise routine that we've seen throughout the history of Godzilla films, all the way through the Showa era and beyond. But it was a great spin on this. Absolutely wonderful. This is my Godzilla impression of Godzilla walking through water during the Showa era. That's Godzilla. I love the way that he uses his arms like this, and the water's like this level. That's Godzilla. Yeah, there we go. All right, it's 11 now here. 11.